He touched me, humiliated me for the color of my skin, and laughed in my face. He didn't know who I was, and I just kept quiet, for the time being. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories. What city are you from? Write in the comments. I remember the first time I walked through the towering arched gates of the university, my backpack slung over one shoulder, my eyes scanning the vastness of the place like someone surveying a city built on a different planet. The path beneath my feet was cobbled and ancient, worn smooth by generations of privilege. Ivy clung to the brick walls like memory, and the bells of the main hall chimed in such a way that they felt less like a timekeeper and more like a declaration. This is a world unto itself, and you are either part of it or you are not. I had chosen to enter it as a ghost. To them, I was just another black girl who got lucky. A quota, a scholarship case, the charity of diversity packaged into one body and sent through corridors that were never built with someone like me in mind. I let them believe it. I didn't correct assumptions. I didn't talk much. I didn't wear anything flashy or walk with unnecessary confidence. I occupied the space they expected me to occupy. Peripheral, silently grateful. But the truth was louder than any of them could imagine. I was Ori Grace here, sure. That was the name on my ID badge and student file. But back home, where legacy and power spoke in quiet rooms and behind closed mahogany doors, I was Aureliana Hartley Grace, daughter of Sabine Grace, the chairwoman of the university's board of governors, and Raymond Hartley, whose money had resurrected this institution from the brink of bankruptcy 15 years ago. My grandfather, Augustus Grace, was the man who bought the original land the university was built on. There was a portrait of him in the main library. I'd passed it every week, and no one had ever noticed me look up at it. They never knew I was staring at family. My parents hadn't been pleased with my decision. I'd insisted on enrolling under a modified name, with no public link to them, no security detail, no preferential treatment. I wanted to learn, to see what this university actually was, not what it pretended to be when the donors toured the halls. I told them I wanted to be a student, but that wasn't entirely true. I wanted to know what this place did to people like me when it didn't know it owed us anything. It didn't take long to find out. From the first day of classes, the glances started. The subtle, half-smirking looks from girls in pearl earrings and pressed cashmere. The raised eyebrows from boys who sat in the front row but only ever made eye contact with the professor and each other. In the dining halls, I was background noise. In the hallways, I was an obstacle. In the lecture rooms, I was invisible until I spoke, and when I did, the room always felt like it had forgotten I could. Ethics and Power was one of those courses everyone warned you about, not because it was hard, but because of who taught it. Professor Lawrence Hart, a man who didn't just lecture, he performed. He stalked the room like a stage, hands in the air, voice rising and falling like a sermon. Tall, sharply dressed, eternally composed, and with a head of perfectly silvered hair that only added to his academic mystique, he was beloved by students and feared by junior faculty. There were rumors, of course, about favoritism, about whispers that turned into grade changes, but nothing concrete, nothing ever was with men like him. I had sat near the back on the first day, blending into the sea of half-interest and overconfidence. When I finally raised my hand to answer a question on Machiavelli, he paused, stared at me for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then smiled. "Miss Grace," he said, rolling the name over his tongue like he was memorizing it. "That's a rather bold interpretation." "It's the literal one," I replied. My voice was steady, controlled, measured in the way my mother taught me. He tilted his head, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite mockery. "Even better," he said. "Literal boldness is still boldness." After class, he stopped me on the way out. "You've studied this before?" he asked. "Only what was assigned." He looked me over then, not in the usual cursory way of professors checking if they should remember your name, but with the kind of interest that felt like someone reaching into your space without touching you. It made my skin itch. "You should come by office hours," he said. "I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on Hobbes. Your perspective is interesting." Interesting. That was the word they always used when they couldn't say what they meant. Not like us. Not supposed to speak like this, like she belongs here. I nodded and walked away. But I already knew I would go. I wasn't afraid of men like Professor Hart. I was raised at the tables they begged to be invited to. Still, I didn't tell anyone. I kept my notebook closed and my headphones in. I let the other students pass me like I was fog. I let them talk about their ski vacations and internships secured through family friends. I let them dismiss me, minimize me, laugh at me when I tripped on the uneven stone steps leading to Old Hall. One girl even whispered, "Quota Queen," as she walked past. I smiled. You learn more by listening than by talking. That's what my father always said. The room will tell you what it is, if you shut up long enough to let it. Professor Hart's office was tucked into a corner of the philosophy wing, half hidden behind a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. I visited during office hours, just like he'd asked. I didn't want to arouse suspicion. If I was going to observe, I had to play my part. He welcomed me with a smile that lingered a little too long and a gaze that wandered a little too low. His office was precisely what I expected. Mahogany bookshelves, volumes lined like soldiers, a Persian rug underfoot, and a decanter of something brown and expensive on the shelf behind his desk. We talked about Hobbes and Locke, Rousseau and power theory. He let his sentences trail off when I spoke, watching my lips like the words I said were ornamental. At one point he touched my hand, just briefly. Just enough for plausible deniability. "You're very sharp," he said, "and unusual." "I've been told that," I replied. The meetings continued. At first it was weekly, then it became more frequent. He said I was a promising mind. He asked if I wanted to assist with research. He offered to introduce me to his colleagues. He complimented my clothes, my posture, my voice. I kept coming, I kept smiling. I kept listening. I didn't flinch when he sat closer than necessary. I didn't recoil when he reached for my shoulder and held it too long. I didn't react when he let his fingers brush the inside of my wrist. I went home and wrote it all down. Every moment, every word, every shift in his tone. I created a folder on my laptop, buried beneath layers of innocent file names. I called it Observations. Each document had a date, a time, a title. I started recording audio clips on my phone. Eventually, I bought a miniature voice recorder and stitched it into the lining of my tote bag. They always assumed we were slow to adapt. That was their first mistake. The university was exactly what I expected it to be. A grand illusion of fairness, dressed in stone and tradition. The students floated on networks of legacy and name. The professors were gods in their own kingdoms. The system didn't protect students like me because it didn't believe we mattered enough to be harmed. But what if the student they underestimated had the power to burn it all down? I was never going to scream or cry or plead. That wasn't my story. My mother taught me never to fight like they expect you to. She said, "You don't bring a knife to a gunfight, sweetheart. You buy the building where they make the bullets." So I stayed quiet, and they mistook my silence for submission. But I was taking notes. I was building something. And Professor Hart? He was building his own gallows, one smug smile at a time. By the time the first email arrived, just a harmless late-night follow-up to our discussion on Nietzsche, I already knew how this would end. He didn't, but he would. The first time I entered Professor Hart's office alone after hours, the air felt different. It was heavier, as if the room itself had inhaled and refused to exhale. I remember pausing at the door for a moment, my hand wrapped around the brass knob, listening to the muted sounds of the building settling into night. The campus was quiet at that hour, just the echo of distant heels, the low murmur of a cleaning crew 2 floors down, the occasional rustle of wind against the tall glass windows in the corridor. When I finally opened the door, he was already seated behind his desk, a glass in one hand, his eyes too bright for the dim lighting. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile from lecture halls or hallway greetings. It was slower, more personal, like we shared something secret. I took a seat in the leather chair across from him, keeping my posture open, relaxed. I let him believe I was comfortable. That was important. He began by discussing the midterm paper, a dissection of Hobbesian sovereignty. He said I had a unique voice, one that challenged assumptions and defied convention. His tone was admiring, but beneath that admiration lived something else, something that made my skin crawl, though I never let it show. He moved on to talk about how most students were lazy thinkers, how he rarely encountered someone he could truly engage with intellectually. He told me I made him think. That was when his hand reached across the desk, settling on mine. Just briefly. Just enough to create discomfort, but not enough to accuse. "I think you're the brightest student I've had in years," he said, his voice low. "There's something about you." I smiled gently, pulled my hand away with the smooth motion of someone brushing a speck of dust off her lap. I didn't confront him. I didn't withdraw. I simply redirected the conversation back to the essay. He followed the lead, but the smile lingered. Later that night, I wrote down everything he said. I backed up the audio. I archived the date, time, and transcript. I copied the file to 2 separate encrypted drives. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The emails started soon after. At first, they were innocuous. References to reading material, appreciation for our conversations, invitations to share further thoughts over coffee. Then, they shifted. Compliments became personal. "You have a voice that stays with me," one said. "It's rare to find intelligence and grace in the same person." Another, "I think we understand each other in ways most people can't." It would have been flattering if it wasn't so calculated. By the 3rd week, he was emailing me at midnight. "Can't sleep. Wondering what you're thinking about." And then, "If we weren't in this setting, I'd say more. Maybe one day we'll be able to talk without all these rules." I never responded. In class, he began to single me out, sometimes praising, sometimes chastising. One moment I was his star pupil, the next he accused me of missing nuance, of simplifying arguments, of getting distracted by emotion. It was subtle but deliberate, a tightening of control. I knew what he was doing. He wanted to shake me, make me seek his approval, make me uncertain of my standing so that when he offered it back, I'd feel grateful. But I didn't need his approval. I only needed his patterns. I wasn't just collecting words anymore. I began recording our surroundings, how he closed the blinds during meetings, how his tone shifted depending on whether the door was open, how often he used proximity as a tool. Every detail mattered. The hardest part was pretending not to care. There were moments when I wanted to slam my hands on the desk, when I wanted to shout, "Do you know who I am?" But power used too soon is power wasted. My mother taught me that. "You wait until the room is quiet," she'd say, "and then you speak." So I let the days unfold. One afternoon, during a lecture on Kantian ethics, he asked me to stay after class. I remained seated as the others filed out. He closed the door behind them and turned to me with a look that made my pulse race, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the theater he was performing. "I'm worried about you," he said, his tone falsely tender. "You've seemed distracted." "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "I wonder if you understand the position you're in. This is a challenging course, a lot of pressure." "I'm managing it." He stepped closer. "Sometimes I think pressure brings out your brilliance. Other times, I wonder if it's too much." He paused, letting silence stretch between us. Then, "You want a good grade, right?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "Yes," I said, carefully. I want the grade I've earned. His expression flickered, just for a second, then returned to its composed mask. Of course, that's what we all want. He let the statement settle, then gestured to the door. We'll talk more next time. I walked out without looking back. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my coat pocket and turned off the recorder. The audio would be clean, clear. His tone, his phrasing, undeniable. That evening, I returned to my dorm and began to compile the files. I created a spreadsheet cross-referencing each encounter, listing timestamps, quotes, physical movements, and his shifting behavior patterns. I created a color code, yellow for ambiguous, orange for suggestive, red for explicit. There were more reds than I anticipated. Still, I didn't act, not yet. Instead, I began searching internal university databases. I used credentials passed to me years ago, from my mother's assistant, when I was still deciding whether to attend. I knew they hadn't been revoked. Most people never thought to deactivate access that seemed irrelevant. I was right. I navigated through faculty evaluations, student complaints, disciplinary review boards. It took time, but I found them. 3 anonymous complaints over the past 6 years, all alleging similar behavior. Manipulative emails, inappropriate proximity, suggestive comments, all dismissed. No formal inquiries. 2 of the students had withdrawn from the university within a semester. I wrote their names down. Using university forums, encrypted message boards, and student group directories, I traced one of them. Layla, now working for a nonprofit overseas. I contacted her through an encrypted messaging platform. After a week, she responded. Her message was simple. He does the same thing, every time. I hope you're smarter than I was. I replied, I don't need to be smarter. I just need to be patient. The next week, he invited me to his office again. This time, it was past 8 p.m. The halls were nearly empty. I made sure to tell a fellow student I had a meeting. I dropped a location pin to myself. I wore a jacket with a second recorder stitched inside the lining. He greeted me with a smile, poured himself a drink, and sat too close on the couch. I've been thinking about you, he said. I'm not supposed to say that, but I have. I remained still. I think you're special, more than just a student. There's something about the way you see the world. It's rare. I'm flattered, I said, calmly. You should be. His hand landed on my knee. This world doesn't always recognize greatness when it sees it, but I do. He leaned in closer. Have you thought about us outside of this setting? I tilted my head slightly. What do you mean? I mean, if things were different, if there weren't rules. There are always rules, I said, still not moving. He smiled, but it faltered. Some rules are made to be bent. I stood up. I should go. His smile faded completely. Don't overreact. I turned to the door. I'm not. I'm just late for something. I walked out slowly, letting the recorder run the whole way down the corridor until I was outside. That night, I listened to the audio twice. Then I backed it up 5 times. I wrote an email to the ethics committee. I attached documentation. I included my statement, along with the logs of other complaints I'd uncovered. Then, I created a second package. That one I sent to the editor of the independent student newspaper. In the morning, I drafted one more note, short, deliberate, and sent directly to Professor Hart's inbox. Before you choose your next words carefully, you should ask yourself if you know who you're talking to. Sometimes the quietest one in the room owns the building. I signed it with my real name. Then I waited. The email sat in his inbox for 2 days before he responded. I checked the read receipt only once. It confirmed what I already knew. He opened it within 6 minutes. That silence after was its own kind of message. It was a pause full of calculation, full of restraint. He didn't lash out, not yet. He was thinking, planning. The predator had caught a glimpse of a sharpened knife in his prey's hand, and he wasn't sure if it was real. But I didn't wait. I kept moving forward. The ethics committee responded sooner than I anticipated. A terse acknowledgement, no promises. They would conduct an initial assessment of the material I provided. Standard protocol. They asked for a time to meet privately. I offered 3 options and CC'd their legal liaison. I signed the email with both my enrolled name and the full name they never knew I carried. It was time they saw them side by side. The student newspaper editor was more animated. His reply arrived within hours. "Is this real?" he asked. "Do you understand what this could mean?" I told him yes. I told him I understood more than he could imagine. I gave him permission to use the documents, with anonymity for anyone but myself. I wanted no shadows, no blurred identities. He didn't reply immediately, but when he did, it was a single sentence. Then we'd better get it right. I expected Hart to act quickly after that, to confront me, to feign ignorance or apologize in an oily voice with trembling hands. But he didn't. He waited. When he did speak to me, it was in front of the class, his tone the same as always. Just enough charm to pacify, just enough menace to control. But he didn't ask me to stay behind again. He didn't email, he didn't touch. Instead, he made a different move. He returned one of my essays with a fat red mark at the top. B. The comments in the margin were vague, dismissive, condescending. Surface-level analysis. Lacking depth. Disappointing for your previous performance. I smiled when I read it, not because it pleased me, but because it was so perfectly predictable. After class, I approached him. Other students were still gathering their bags, slowly filing out. "Professor," I said evenly, holding the paper between us, "I wanted to ask about your comments." He glanced at it, barely hiding the smirk curling the corner of his mouth. "You don't agree with the grade?" he asked, voice pitched just loud enough for the stragglers to hear. "I'm interested in your reasoning." His eyes sparkled like he was stepping onto a stage. "Well, I suppose not everyone lives up to their early promise. Peaks come early for some." A few students paused by the door, uncertain whether to leave or linger. "I see," I said. "So this was personal." His expression flickered for half a second. That tiny break in the mask. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'd be careful with that tone." "I'm not afraid of my tone." "Maybe you should be. This is a rigorous institution. If you can't handle criticism, I can. I just want to make sure it's actually criticism." His mouth flattened into a thin line. He stepped back and nodded to the door. "Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be. That depends entirely on you." He didn't answer. I turned and left. The air outside was cold. The sun had dipped below the rooftops, painting the edges of the old buildings in burnt orange. I let the chill bite into my fingers as I walked, needing to feel something raw. Every part of me ached with tension, not from fear, but from the pressure of holding everything together. This wasn't just about me anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I spent that night reviewing the documents again. I cross-checked the audio timestamps with my notes, edited a summary for the ethics committee, and created visual charts showing patterns, how his language escalated over time, how his behavior changed the closer we got to deadlines. I made it irrefutable. Then I reached out to Layla again. I sent her the current article draft the student newspaper was preparing. She asked to remain anonymous, but gave me a written statement. I sent it to the editor. He added it to the report. When the story broke 3 days later, it wasn't subtle. The headline ran in bold, across the front page of the campus paper: "Power, Silence, and Predation, a professor's pattern of misconduct." There were quotes, dates, audio transcripts, anonymized statements from past victims. My name appeared at the end of the article, spelled in full: Aureliana Hartley Grace. The ripple across campus was immediate. Students whispered in every hallway. Professors glanced nervously through their office windows. Emails flew like birds in a panic. The university's PR office went into overdrive. Hart did not teach the next lecture. A substitute arrived instead, nervous and stammering, pretending nothing had happened. I knew it wasn't over. 2 days after the article ran, I was summoned to a meeting with the Ethics Committee. The letter was formal, but not cold. It included the time, date, location, and a note that legal counsel would be present for everyone's protection. I read that line twice. The meeting was in the administrative wing, in a room designed to intimidate. High ceilings, large table, windows overlooking the main quad. I arrived early. My mother was already seated at the far end of the table. She didn't look at me when I entered, but she did nod. The rest of the committee filed in slowly. I recognized most of them. I'd seen their names in reports, their signatures on internal memos. One man, Dr. Cardenas, cleared his throat and began the meeting. We are here today to review allegations brought forward by Miss Aureliana Hartley Grace, a student of this university, concerning misconduct by Professor Lawrence Hart. These allegations are serious, and this meeting is not to determine guilt, but to assess next steps. They reviewed my report. They played 3 audio excerpts. They read portions of the emails aloud. Every voice around the table was tight, clipped, professional, but their eyes, they shifted, narrowed, glanced sidelong at one another like cracks were forming in a glass floor beneath them. At one point, a younger faculty member asked why this wasn't brought forward sooner. My mother finally spoke. Perhaps because previous attempts by other students were buried, she said, her voice steady as stone, and perhaps because those responsible for burying them are still sitting in this room. No one answered. After an hour, they excused me from the room. I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding harder than it had in months. My mother joined me minutes later. "You did well," she said. "I wasn't performing." "No," she agreed, "but they were." "Will anything actually change?" She looked at me then, long and hard. "It will, now." That evening, I returned to my dorm. The halls were quieter than usual. When I passed other students, they glanced at me, then quickly away. A few stared longer, uncertain. One girl even stopped me. "Was it true?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry." I nodded and kept walking. In my room, I sat down and wrote one more message. I addressed it to Hart. This time, I didn't hide my tone. "You told me once not to overreact, that there was no need to turn this into something bigger than it needed to be. But you were wrong. You made it big. You made it dangerous. You used your position to play God in classrooms you thought you owned. You don't own anything. Not this university, not the people in it, not the future, not me. You wanted control. You got exposed. I don't want trouble, Professor, but you do. I didn't send it. I just saved it. For the record." The next morning, the university announced a full investigation into Professor Hart's conduct. He was placed on administrative leave. Campus security escorted him out of his office that afternoon. They boxed up his books. His name was removed from the course list by evening. And for the first time since I'd arrived on campus, the silence around me felt earned, not given, owned. The day of the Ethics Committee's public hearing was cold and gray, the sky a seamless sheet of steel, stretched flat above the ancient stone of the university's central quad. I stood by the tall windows of my room, watching the students move below like scattered dots on a quiet canvas. Some of them moved briskly, heads down, minds elsewhere. Others lingered, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes sweeping the main entrance of the administration building, as though they expected something monumental to happen before the day ended. They weren't wrong. I had risen early, not from nerves, but from habit. The air in my dorm was stale and still, the kind of stillness that settles over a place when something inevitable is approaching. I didn't eat breakfast. My stomach was too tight. I didn't need food. I needed focus. I dressed simply. Black slacks, white blouse, no jewelry. I tied my hair back in a low knot and left my face bare. I didn't want distractions. I didn't want softness. I wanted to be remembered. When I arrived at the administration building, a line of students and faculty had already begun to form outside. A few of them turned to look as I walked past. Some recognized me, others didn't. One student, a girl from my philosophy section, offered a small nod. I returned it. No smiles, no words, only understanding. Inside, the room was already half full. Long walnut table at the center, leather chairs arranged with brutal symmetry, tall windows at the back draped in navy blue curtains that seemed too heavy for the space. I took my seat quietly, the only sound the soft creak of leather beneath me. I kept my hands in my lap. Across from me sat the committee members, 7 in total, each bearing the expression of people who had read more than they ever wanted to read, and were now preparing for the slow burn of public scrutiny. The dean was seated at the far end, flanked by 2 university lawyers. My mother was also present, though not among the committee. She sat in the front row of observers, back straight, hands clasped in her lap, face carved in stone. I wondered if anyone around her realized that she was the most powerful person in the room. Probably not. That was her gift. She wore invisibility, like armor. Then he entered. Lawrence Hart. He walked in flanked by a representative from faculty council and his personal attorney, a wiry man with glasses and the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Hart looked older than I remembered. The suit was flawless, the posture perfect, but his face betrayed him. Sallow, sunken, pale. He scanned the room once, his gaze sweeping quickly over the observers, and landed on me. Our eyes met. I held his gaze for 2 full seconds, then looked away, as if he were the least interesting object in the room. I wanted that moment to stick. The chair of the committee, Professor Cardenas, opened the hearing with a brief summary. His voice was dry, formal, as though reading from a text he'd been forced to memorize against his will. He explained the purpose of the meeting, to review the submitted evidence, allow for public response, and determine whether disciplinary action would be pursued pending further legal process. The evidence was presented with ruthless efficiency. First, the emails, projected onto a large screen, read aloud without inflection. The flirtations disguised as academic encouragement, the midnight musings, the conditional praise. Then came the audio clips. The room grew quieter with each one. The sound of Hart's voice filled the space, intimate and unmistakable. "You want a good grade, right? You're special. You make me think. Some rules are made to be bent." I watched the faces around the table as the recordings played. Some committee members shifted uncomfortably. One looked directly at Hart, his expression unreadable. My mother didn't move. Then came the student testimonies. Names withheld, but their words cut cleanly through the silence. Layla's statement was read first, then 2 others. Then mine. My own voice, calm, composed, recounting each instance, every interaction, each calculated move. I didn't dramatize, I didn't waver. I simply told the truth. When the presentation concluded, Cardenas turned to me. "Miss Hartley Grace, would you like to speak?" I stood. My legs were steady, my heartbeat even. "Thank you," I said, and then paused, letting the room breathe. I didn't come to this university to be known. I didn't come to make statements or stir disruption. I came to learn, to challenge myself, to earn something on my own terms. That's why I didn't use my family name. That's why I enrolled as Ari Grace. I wanted to see what this place really was. I looked at Hart. He stared at the table, and I saw. I saw a system that protects its own, even when its own are dangerous. I saw how easy it was to be dismissed, to be discredited, to be manipulated. I watched it happen not only to myself, but to others before me. The difference is, I had the resources to do something about it. Others didn't. My voice didn't shake. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not seeking vengeance. I'm here because If I hadn't been born into the family, I was, none of you would be sitting here today. He would still be teaching, still doing what he always does. You would have let him. Another pause. I could feel the weight of the room leaning forward. You failed them. The students who came before me, the ones who were hurt and silenced and ignored, you failed them. I turned to Hart then, and you failed yourself. You thought no one would notice, that no one would dare. But I was never afraid of you. I knew what you were the moment you smiled at me like I was something you could use. He didn't lift his head. I want this place to change, not because I want it to fall apart, but because I believe it can be better. I believe we deserve better. I returned to my seat. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Professor Cardenas cleared his throat. Thank you, Miss Hartley Grace. Hart's attorney requested a statement on behalf of his client. It was full of careful phrasing and denial. Out of context. Misunderstood. A pattern of aggressive targeting. Hart didn't speak. He just nodded occasionally, like a man whose world had shrunk into bullet points prepared by someone else. The committee adjourned 20 minutes later with promises of formal review and disciplinary proceedings. Hart was escorted out of the room. I watched him go without feeling anything. No triumph, no rage, just closure. Outside, students gathered in clusters on the lawn, whispering, pointing, checking updates on their phones. The article had been updated, photos included now, my name in bold. I walked through them, untouched. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and refreshed the university's official website. Hart's profile was gone. The ethics committee had posted a statement. The university was initiating a full review of internal reporting procedures and faculty oversight. Immediate changes would be announced in the coming weeks. I leaned back in my chair. It was done. Later that evening, I received an email from a junior professor I barely knew. She thanked me, told me she'd once witnessed Hart behaving inappropriately and had stayed quiet out of fear. She said things were changing now, that I had changed them. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. The next morning, the sun came out. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window, watching the light move across the quad like a quiet tide. There would be more battles, more stories, more truths to uncover. But this one was mine. I had come here to learn. Instead, I taught them something. I taught them that silence is not absence, that stillness is not weakness, that power, when used quietly, is still power. And when I walked past the library that day, I paused by the portrait of my grandfather. For the first time, I let myself look at it not as a secret, but as a legacy. I smiled, because I had spoken, and now they were finally listening. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and others you might have missed, and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.